Good morning, Evergreen Church. I come to you from the Sea of Galilee. Behind me is a waterfall, and near this place, Jesus met Peter. This is a place where they had spread their nets, washed them perhaps in this waterfall, mending them, cleaning them, and hearing the words of Jesus. The world changed from this place. And today I want to invite you on a tour of Israel. You may not be on a plane coming here, but you can join with me. I have with me Scott and Kathy. They're on this little mini solidarity tour, and we're here in the land being with the Jewish people and the Arab Israeli people, being the presence of Jesus to them. And it's been so incredibly impactful. I've got a lot to tell you about what's happening. Jesus said something really significant just before he died. He said, as he was eating with the disciples, "After I have risen, I will go ahead of you into Galilee." Galilee is a really special place. It's undeveloped. It looks very much like it did in the days of Jesus. And today we're going to walk along a nature trail on the shore of Galilee. Hardly anybody uses this. Most people just ride in tour buses, but I like to get out of the bus, take the trails that perhaps even Jesus walked on. You and I are going to walk through some scrub land. There are thorns that Jesus talked about. There's a beautiful lake behind us. And we're going to take the footsteps of Jesus. Jesus still meets people here, and he wants to meet you today. So we're going to talk and walk our way through the story of Jesus. There's another thing that Jesus said just before he went to the cross. He said in John chapter 15, that I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. I was walking along this shore just the other morning, and I saw something new. As I've read this passage for years, I've always focused on I have to remain in Jesus, just like the branch of a tree remains in the trunk of the tree. But Jesus also promises to remain in me. And as I walked along this trail, I began to meditate. Just as the disciples walked with Jesus and he walked with them, he wants to take root inside of us. Our faith isn't just something in our head. It is something deeply relational. I know today some of you are being baptized for the first time. And Jesus wants to take root in your heart. So come with me. Let's just take the trail with Jesus. It's a rugged trail, lots of stones. And as you walk this trail, it's so easy to think of what it was like for Jesus to walk with the disciples. Got the beautiful lake behind us, and these aren't wide pathways, they're narrow pathways. What we're doing is called pilgrimage. It's not just taking a trip, it's what happens on the way of the journey. It's not about getting to the destination, it's what you become on the way. It's also the people you travel with. In the Bible it says that the highways to Zion are in the heart. So the desire to come to Israel is something that God puts in our heart. And we're on a trail that Jesus probably walked on. And this dust that's on the ground very easily could have been in the sandals of the disciples. In fact, one of the things I like to do when I'm in a holy place is open the Bible to that story and rub some dust onto the page. That simple little thing reminds me in the future, that brown spot, that I was in that place where the event took place. Jesus said he would meet us here, and I'm believing he's going to meet us here today as we take this little walk and talk together. I think this is so important because you and I live in a time of deep fake, where we can't trust anything we see online. And this book is real. This is why it's so important to come to the world of Jesus, to see the world that he lived in. Like one of the things in the stories of Jesus, you remember the parable of the soils, and he talks about the thorns that grow up and choke out the seed. What he's talking about are things like this. These are really sharp thorns, really painful. But yet at the top of these thorns, it's actually quite beautiful. We got these purple flowers over here. Here's a really nice one. And I think, man, this is just like life. There are things that are so beautiful and we want to go for that beautiful, beautiful flower. But instead there are thorns around them. And Jesus is saying, hey guys, watch out. Life has cares and worries. And what we think if we buy it now, we're going to be happy later. Jesus is saying, be really careful with that. He's using everyday life to communicate important messages, and it's happening as they walk on the way. Come on, let's keep walking. You and I are on a trail, and there's room on this trail just for two people. And this is exactly what it was to follow Jesus. Sometimes the trails are so narrow, there's only room for one person. You've got to follow step by step. And those were the kind of trails that were here in the days of Jesus. Jesus said, follow me, and I will make you fishers of men. What do you mean? Well, first of all, he's using the imagery of Psalm 23, the image of the shepherd, because the sheep follow the shepherd. And Jesus is presenting himself publicly as the good shepherd. He's a Messiah. And he's calling the followers to follow him step by step. Did you know that the first Christians weren't called Christians? And did you know that Jesus didn't come to start Christianity? That was the title the world gave us. The first believers called themselves followers of the way, the path, just like this. Now it gets even deeper than this. In Judaism, the Torah, those are the first 5 books, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, they are called the way. In fact, they're called the way, the truth, and the life. Does this sound familiar? And so Jesus says, I am the way. What he means is he's the Torah. Now it gets even more interesting. When we arrived here in Israel, we had the opportunity to go to bar mitzvah. A bar mitzvah is at the age of 13. A young man becomes a son of the commandment, and the father is incredibly joyful and sometimes dances with the son. In this event, we had 300 people who were gathered together to celebrate this young man. It was incredibly impactful because this was the brother of a soldier who died on the first day of Hamas's attack. And it was the first joy this family had experienced since the death of their son on October 7. And only God could have worked out that timing. We had with us Cole Peterson on this trip. And there came this point, he got included with the youth sitting at the youth table. The young man who was 13 took the Torah scrolls and embraced them. And then he danced through the church. And they created kind of the ensemble line, their dance line. And these young guys danced with the scriptures. And when I walk on this pathway, I think when Jesus said, follow me, he says, I'm the Torah, embrace me, follow me. That he's the living book, he's the word. So how does this work in your relationship with Jesus? You and I aren't religious people following a code of ethics. Rather, you and I are relational people in relationship with a God who has come to us in human form, and we can follow Jesus, and he leads us by his Spirit. And if you are just following Jesus, one of the keys that he's speaking is it's so simple. And that's the power of these simple words, come follow me. Now he says something else there. He says, follow me and I will make you fishers of men, of course women as well. He wants us to be influential with people. Now, Jesus is speaking to people from all kinds of backgrounds. You got Matthew, who's a tax collector. Some of them obviously are fishermen. They understand this. Jesus himself is a hard-working, laboring man. He's a carpenter. I think it's probably more like a general contractor. So Jesus uses something that they understand. And they know how to go out into this lake. It's just beautiful. And on this lake, they've caught fish. vast amounts of fish. What's surprising about Galilee is how wealthy this region was. That's right. I know you may have heard that Jesus ministered to poor peasant people and they didn't have much, but the reality is Galilee produced a special kind of fish highly prized by the Romans, so they would salt and preserve these fish and ship them off to Rome. Here in Galilee, they had tax collectors. You have tax collectors because you have money. Here in Galilee, they found the largest cache of gold coins ever discovered, 500 gold coins. It would take a lifetime to get one gold coin, 500. So there was money here in Galilee. We saw in the village where Mary Magdalene was, exquisite, beautiful mosaics in the floor, found only in the home of the high priest in Jerusalem. There was money here in the Galilee. And Jesus called these men who understood this world of fishing and a really prosperous business. He said, listen, I'm going to make you influential with people. These men would, within 3 years, be speaking to 3,000 people. Within a decade or so, they say that the church in Jerusalem grew to over 100,000 believers before the great persecution. And then beyond that, they're going to reach cities like Antioch and Ephesus and eventually Rome itself. Jesus wants to make you remarkably influential in influencing many, many lives. I want to tell you something else. God is doing some amazing things here. And I know some of you think, why would you come to Israel in a time of war? I can't think of a better time to be in this country because hearts are so open. This is my third trip here since the war began. And I took these trips because when October the 7th happened, I laid on my couch and I thought, I'm just so affected by the grief and the trauma of what I'm seeing. This is the most horrific attack that's happened not only in Israel's history, but as you study the history of warfare, what Hamas did on October 7th is the worst atrocity ever committed in the entire history of human warfare. It's never been done before. More people died in one day in the Jewish context since the Holocaust. And it happened in the land of Israel, a place where Jews had come to be safe. And as I laid on my couch, I just felt, what would my ancestors do? My ancestors were Jews. I thought, well, they would come here to Israel. And they would want to be with their people. So I booked a flight and I came. And on that trip, I was staying in a hotel in Nazareth. There are many what are called displaced families. These are people who live in the border areas, and because of the attacks that were taking place, these people had to go and live in hotels. They're still living in these hotels, over 100,000 people. As I sat in the lobby, a man approached me and said, "You must be the only tourist in Israel." And we started this incredible conversation. It was a remarkable story he told me. His sister had been killed in an accident. She was a cyclist or a triathlete, and she was out training. She was struck by a driver. Then his mother, to redeem this crisis, began a triathlon event for all women in Israel. And his mother was a mentor and example to many people. And then she succumbed to cancer. And when she died, her bike was gifted to a lady who lived on the border of Gaza, who wanted to live at peace with her neighbors. When Hamas attacked, and many of the attacks of Hamas were done to the people who they knew, and the Jewish people there knew their attackers, they hid in their safe room. They were saved, but the bike was stolen and taken. And I heard this story and a little bit more, because when he went to post the story on a platform, a U.S. triathletes platform, they said they wouldn't tell the story because it was too political. And I thought, it's not political. It's a deep injustice. And so I put it on my social media, and as a result, it's a long story, she got a bike. And it was a beautiful thing. When I came back here to visit in the land on this trip, I reached out to him. And we were invited to go up to his home at the border of Lebanon. This was the second time he had been back to his house. Things were exactly as they were on October the 7th. he had a guide take us through the kibbutz and through the region around, and we went down some nature trails down to what's called the Banias River. This is the same river that Jesus walked along as he went to Caesarea Philippi, where he said, you are Peter, and on this rock I'll build my church. It's the same river he walked as he walked up this steep mountain where the Transfiguration took place. It was a really holy place, incredibly beautiful. And as we're standing at the base of this river, his friend, the tour guide, handed me a New Testament, and underlined were the words of Jesus, on this rock I'll build my church. And he wanted me to read it. And what happened next was so holy, because I said to them, let me explain what Jesus was saying. I told them, did you know that Jesus never intended to start Christianity? That he was a Jew, he was speaking within Judaism to other Jews. And he was speaking to them because the religion was dying. And he came to bring life, because he is the living Torah that lives. And I explained his vision for the church. It isn't a building, it's a people on the move. In fact, the words that he used are the called out ones, the people on the move. I surprised them by saying, did you know Jesus was an athlete? He climbed mountains. I said he was 30 years old, and all the men around him were young men. Of course they wanted to climb mountains. And their faces first looked kind of quizzical and then inspired. And one of the guides said to me, I really like those first 8 sentences. And I knew he meant the Beatitudes. And I said, let me explain what they mean. I said, in most world religions, it's like a ladder. You got to climb up the ladder to meet God at the top. But in the Christian faith, they're like 8 steps, not to climb up to find God, but God climbs down the ladder to meet us at the bottom. This ladder is about coming out of our pride. Their countenance changed. And then what happened next was so holy. These 2 grown men, these are tough guys. They started bawling, sobbing. And we just stood there and hugged as they just sobbed and sobbed. What were they grieving about? Well, you'd grieve too if you hadn't been home for 8 months. You'd grieve too if your family were living in hotel rooms and your kids had lost their whole friendship network. You would grieve too if daily rockets were being shot into your neighborhood. And for a moment, they felt comfort. They said, you are the only visitors who've come here since October 7th. Just think of it. You and I have been called to comfort those who grieve in Zion. So today, Jesus is still leading people in the land. He's leading you where you are. There are people who need your comfort, they need your presence. But this is why it's so important to be in the Word, to know the presence of Christ, to feel His direction. Come on, let's look at some more things. At the end of His ministry, Jesus gave His disciples a second command. His first command was, follow me. But now He's going to heaven to be with His Father. So He says, a new commandment I give to you, a second command. You must love one another. As I have loved you, you must love one another. He then washed their feet as an example. And we felt that so powerfully on this trip. We had 2 experiences back to back. First, we came for a wedding. Our friend Ilya married his new wife, Deneen. It was a beautiful wedding, but it was also an incredible statement of sacrificial love. Deneen is an American. She's from Minnesota. She has Jewish ancestry. She did what's called Aliyah. She's coming here to the land to live. And right now, Ilya is serving his nation in the defense forces. And they had a beautiful wedding. Now, Jewish weddings aren't just like cake and punch. Jewish weddings go until 3 o'clock in the morning. They dance like you haven't seen dancing before. So after a beautiful wedding ceremony with all the Jewish symbolism, of course, Jesus, Yeshua, was at the center of it. The party began. His whole platoon of soldiers came and they danced. Basically this tight circle of human beings jumping up and down for about an hour, and then they break for food. They go back and jump up and down some more, and they go back and get some food. There's a lot of throwing people up into the air and doing breakdancing on the ground, and they jump up and down to 3 o'clock in the morning. And then finally they go on their honeymoon. Wow. Incredible joy, incredible love. The next morning, we got in our car and we drove a half hour down the road to a place called Nova. Nova means sun, bright, beautiful. But Nova is exactly the opposite, because this was a public park where thousands of young people had come for a multiple-day concert devoted to peace. And it was here that the terrorists attacked. 360 young people were slaughtered. They've created a makeshift memorial. They have little fence stakes in the ground. On top of each is a full color photo of someone who died, and people have come and made beautiful tributes around them. I stood in front of a billboard with all 360 faces looking at me. As I looked at it, I thought, I just can't be silent anymore. I have to speak for God's people. We had with us a young man. His name is Yair. Yair is just months away from going into the military himself. And his friend, David Ratner, on day one, gave his life for the defense of Israel. He was called up to serve on that day, as all the soldiers were. His mother dropped him off at his base, and she asked him, because she's a pastor's wife, "David, are you in a right relationship with Jesus?" And he said, "Mom, don't worry. Jesus is the Lord of my life." Those are the last things she heard from her son. They said that after he was shot, he fought like a lion. He lived for another 4 hours and then eventually was taken down. We're now going back to the place where all these things happened. You can see in the pavement of the road the burned scorch marks of cars that had been torched by the terrorists. It was my second visit. It was probably more impactful than the first. But what impacted me most was our friend Yair. In fact, I want you to listen to what he said. Have a listen to this.
This is one of the results when someone hates you. And we should love them, our enemies, even though it's hard.
Here's a young man who lost his friend, and he's forgiving his enemies. As you can see, it was really hard for him to say that. It's hard for any of us to forgive. But Jesus said, love one another. The problems in this country are so deep, there's no political solution that will ultimately fix them. The only solution is Yeshua, Jesus himself. There's a deep understanding right now within Judaism that the only hope for this land is God's help and help alone. One of the beautiful things that I'm finding here as I visit Israel is I go up to people I've never met before. Maybe somebody working in a store, somebody I meet on the street, and I tell them we're here from Seattle, Washington, to visit here in the land. And the first thing they say are like, "What are you doing here?" Jews are really outspoken. And then I say, well, it's not enough to say I stand with Israel, I want to stay with Israelis. And then the second thing happens is they begin to cry and they become emotional. And they say, thank you so much for being here. Jesus said that we must love one another. When I come here, people say, don't you get afraid? I say, no, it's the opposite. When I'm at home and I hear all the news and the media, I get really apprehensive. But when I come here, I feel courage because I see Israelis who are deeply trusting God, both Jews and Christians and Arabs. And it causes me to trust God more deeply myself. You and I can really trust God. And this is just so simple if we love one another. It's amazing the confidence we have that comes out of love. There's one more thing I want to tell you. Jesus loved mountains. You can see from this spot some incredible mountains. Off in the distance on a really good day, you can see Mount Hermon. It's 9,000 feet, snow-capped. It's kind of like a mini Mount Rainier. Right over my shoulder here is the Mount of Beatitudes. Jesus would have looked at these every day. But just over the hill is Mount Arbel. Mount Arbel is the mountain where Jesus prayed all night for the disciples. Mount Arbel is the mountain where Jesus told the disciples to go. I've climbed that mountain a number of times, and every time I do, I think about Jesus' passion to seek the Father in prayer, his focus to find time alone with God. And climbing that mountain, you would definitely be alone. There's not a lot of people who would climb that hill unless they really wanted to be up there. Jesus would be totally alone. And on that mountain, he said these words: "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I've commanded you. And surely I am with you to the end of the age." And Jesus is standing on that mountain speaking to us. He wants us to go. So one of the calls he's given to me is to build a bridge to Israel. We're told clearly in the Bible, Romans chapters 9, 10, and 11, that God's last great roundup of history is not just all the unrest we see, but it's a worldwide awakening, and Israel is the focus. He said all Israel will be saved. That's the last great awakening on the planet. And it's so important that you and I keep coming here to build bridges. This is the land that gave us Messiah. These are the people who gave us Messiah. So now it's time for us to be Messiah back to them. Some people say, well, why don't the Jews believe in Jesus as Messiah? When you study the Jewish story, they've had 2,000 years of followers of Jesus doing some of the most painful things, most unforgivable acts to them. It's no wonder that they don't trust the words that we speak. It's so important to come here and to be Messiah. Paul says in Romans chapter 11, continue in his kindness. That's the secret of reaching not just the Jewish heart, but any heart. You've been given a mission by Jesus to go. One thing that Father Murray said to me, he said, it's never wrong to be kind. It was so powerful when we were sitting in the beautiful church building that's at the site of Magdala, where Mary Magdalene lived. Father Kelly was telling us stories about Jesus, and into the room walked a Jewish family. And for the next half hour, I watched how he so patiently worked with this Jewish family to reveal Jesus to them. It was a holy moment. And in that, he was very careful in what he said, but he started with something that was sort of surprising. We were standing in a modern synagogue building inside of a Catholic church, and he said to them, you might be surprised that there's a synagogue in a Catholic church. And of course they were. He said, this is our synagogue. And now they looked really surprised. He said, you're probably surprised that a Catholic priest would say this is our synagogue. He said, here's why. The church began in the synagogue. And so it's our synagogue together, a place where Jews and Christians meet. And I watched as we walked through the property and saw the sights, their hearts melting and responding. We went as far as we could go in sharing good news about Jesus, but I'm certain they walked away from that place with a different point of view. You and I have sometimes just seconds or moments with people, but we can leave a remembrance of Jesus. I hope that one day you can come to this holy place. I hope one day you can walk this pathway with me. But wherever it is that God has put you, you are a person of great influence. Don't ever think that your life doesn't matter. It does matter. You have a light, so shine it. I was at one of the tourist spots, and the Jewish man behind the counter, when I said to him, I'm here to encourage the people of Israel, he said, we're the light of the nations, and you're here to hold up the light. I thought that was so powerful. Wherever it is that God's put you, you've been put there to hold up the light. If you're being baptized today, it's now your turn to hold up the light. For those of you who are followers of Jesus, keep holding up the light so that it shines in the darkness and gives people hope. Have a great Sunday, a great baptism, and peace to you from the land of Israel.